Breakups can be pretty messy.
Atlanta now officially moves forward in the post-Matt Ryan era.
Desmond Ridder out, Taylor Heineke in.
A breakup between a big-named NFL star and his team is hardly any different than a real-life breakup. So, with that, let's dive into 10 recent NFL breakups that wound up failing for both sides. Derek Carr and the Las Vegas Raiders. Carr was the Raiders quarterback from 2014 to 2022, providing the organization with much-needed long-term stability at the game's most important position. The four-time Pro Bowler led the Raiders to postseason appearances in 2016 and 2021, even though he never had a top 10 defense nor coaching stability. Carr just found a way to keep the silver and black competitive time and time again, regardless of his coaching staff and supporting cast, or rather the lack thereof. But in the midst of a disappointing 2022 season, the Raiders decided to bench Carr for their final 2 games. Less than a year after signing a 3-year extension worth $121.5 million, Carr was released by the Raiders after the club failed to find a trade partner. Carr then signed a 4-year deal worth $150 million with the New Orleans Saints in 2023 free agency. And needless to say, it did not take long for Carr and the Raiders to both realize that they had made a mistake by splitting up. Carr played, by far, the worst football of his career with the Saints in 2023. He left multiple games due to injury, and backup Jameis Winston played better in his absence. Carr was often seen getting into intense screaming matches with his receivers and offensive linemen too, raising questions about his leadership abilities. The Raiders, on the other hand, signed Jimmy Garoppolo to a 3-year pact worth $72.75 million to replace Carr. Garoppolo was benched after 6 games in favor of rookie Aiden O'Connell, who operated with better efficiency after taking over the reins. Is it too late for Carr and the Raiders to admit that they were both wrong and run back to each other? Devonte Adams and Green Bay Packers. Despite a successful 8-year working relationship with Aaron Rodgers, Adams longed for the opportunity to reunite with his old friend and Fresno State teammate Derek Carr in Sin City. So the Packers traded the future Hall of Famer to the Raiders for 2022 first and second round picks, and Adams quickly agreed to a 5-year pact with his new team worth a whopping $140 million. Though Adams put up all-world numbers with the Raiders in 2022, the team limped to a disappointing 6-11 finish. Meanwhile, the Packers went from 3 straight 13-win seasons to an 8-9 finish with no playoff berth, mostly because Aaron Rodgers didn't have a playmaking pass catcher to throw to. The Packers traded Rodgers to the New York Jets in the ensuing offseason. Same issues plagued Jordan Love in 2023, which was, well, he didn't have a true WR1 to lean on. Meanwhile, Adams' Raiders remained stuck in mediocrity during the 2023 season without his friend in Mr. Carr to steer the offense. Look, hindsight's 20/20, sure, but the Packers and Adams should have just stayed together. Matt Ryan and Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons decided to make a couple of changes in 2022 following a 4th straight losing and non-playoff season. The team pursued a Deshaun Watson trade despite the latter's well-documented offseason troubles and despite a looming suspension. That ended up fracturing the relationship with Ryan, who agreed that a trade was going to be best for both sides. The Falcons dealt Ryan to the QB-needy Indianapolis Colts for a 2022 third-round pick. Then they signed 2015 second overall pick Marcus Mariota in free agency before using the number 74 pick on Cincinnati QB Desmond Ridder. As the title of the video says, that breakup was a failure for both sides. Ryan went 4-7-1 as Indy's starter, throwing 14 touchdowns against 13 picks while also taking 38 sacks. Ryan was benched in favor of Sam Ehlinger near the end of the season. Atlanta got lackluster QB play from Mariota and Ridder, who combined for 2,927 passing yards and 17 touchdowns against 9 picks. The Falcons finished 7-10 for a 5th straight losing season. Ryan was released by the Colts in the 2023 offseason. The Falcons endured another mediocre season in 2023 with the Ridder-Taylor-Heineke QB tandem. Ho-hum. Now, just imagine for a couple of moments if the Falcons had just kept Ryan and had him throwing it out to Kyle Pitts and Drake London. Not to mention Tyler Algier and maybe even Bijan Robinson. Just imagine if the Colts didn't trade for another past his prime QB that cost Frank Reich his job. Clearly, the Falcons and Ryan just split up at least 1 year too early. Earl Thomas and Seattle Seahawks. The last remaining members of the Seahawks Legion of Boom had a pretty ugly exit from the Emerald City, and it set up an even uglier exit from the league. Thomas played 4 games for Seattle in 2018 before suffering a leg fracture that ultimately ended his season. Thomas infamously flipped off the Seahawks sideline as he was being carted off, knowing then and there that he would not suit up for them ever again. In the offseason, Thomas signed a 4-year pact with the Baltimore Ravens worth $55 million. He had a great year there and earned his 7th Pro Bowl nod, helping the Ravens to the top seed in the AFC. But in the 2020 offseason, the Ravens released Thomas for punching well-respected teammate Chuck Clark during a practice. Thomas never ended up signing another NFL contract and was done at the age of 31 despite his Hall of Fame accolades. Meanwhile, the Seahawks have been mostly mired in mediocrity since Thomas's departure, and that is due largely to a horrendous pass defense that has just gotten significantly worse without Thomas. So yeah, maybe Thomas and Seattle should have just agreed to play nice and continue their partnership. Having done so would have helped Seattle avoid the ill-fated trade for Jamal Adams too. Chandler Jones and Arizona Cardinals. So 1 year after winning a Super Bowl 49 ring with the New England Patriots, Jones was traded to the Cardinals in a blockbuster deal. Jones went from good in New England to borderline Hall of Famer in the desert, racking up a franchise record 71.5 sacks in 6 seasons to go along with 19 pass defenses and 23 forced fumbles. In the 2022 offseason, Jones signed a 3-year pact with the Las Vegas Raiders worth $51 million. The Cardinals' defense predictably became an absolute mess. Not just a mess, a dumpster fire following Jones' departure, and his tenure with the Raiders was almost as bad as Jaws the Revenge. And if you haven't seen that movie, consider yourself very fortunate.
You got a big fish down here, man.
Oh yeah? How big?
Jones had just 4.5 sacks for the Raiders in 2022. Clashes with management and coaches, concerning social media posts, and an off-the-field arrest led to the Raiders ultimately cutting Jones during the 2023 season. Jones is playing like a Hall of Famer in Arizona, but his contract agreement with the Raiders was essentially the beginning of the end. Another classic case of two sides needing to stay together when things were going so good. Dalvin Cook and Minnesota Vikings. Cook was one of football's premier running backs from 2019 to 2022, recording 4 straight seasons of over 1,100 yards rushing. The 4-time Pro Bowler had 43 rushing scores over that period and led many to playoff appearances in 2019 and 2022. But despite his steady production, the Vikings released Cook in a cap-saving move during the 2023 offseason. They thought veteran RB2 Alexander Mattison could manage to fill the void, and well, Cook wound up signing with Aaron Rodgers' New York Jets. Rodgers suffered a season-ending Achilles tear minutes into his debut, and the Jets season was doomed right from there. Cook barely saw any playing time behind a rising star Breece Hall and pieced together the worst statistical season of his entire career. The Vikings' ground game also suffered tremendously without Cook. Mattison reminded everybody why he was an RB2 all those years. Cook slipped to an RB2 gig on a lousy Jets team. The Vikings' once explosive ground game suddenly became their biggest weakness. So, remind us why Minnesota released in his prime Cook again? Khalil Mack and Chicago Bears. Mack was a beast in his 4 years at the Bears, recording 36 sacks, 11 pass defenses, and 14 forced fumbles. He led the Bears to their first NFC North Division crown since 2010 and 2018, as well as another postseason berth in 2020. But after the Bears fell to 6-11 in 2021, the front office traded Mack to the Los Angeles Chargers for 2022 second and 2023 sixth-round picks. The Bears thought unloading Mack would help their rebuild, and the Bolts hoped that he would be that final piece needed to help them emerge as a force in the AFC. Well, 2 years in, and it's pretty clear that the deal hasn't really worked for either side. The Bears' defense was a top 4 scoring unit twice with Mack, but it was football's worst in 2022. Mack has retained his Pro Bowl-like play in La La Land, but the Chargers have been they've been awful in 2023. His presence hasn't really helped the Chargers D one bit. Jamal Adams and New York Jets. Adams was one of the NFL's premier defensive players over his 3-year tenure with the New York Jets, but the 2019 first-team All-Pro and 2-time Pro Bowler understandably got fed up with the Jets' non-stop losing. So he requested a trade in the 2020 offseason. Adams was traded to the Seattle Seahawks along with a 4th-round pick for 2021 and 2022 first-rounders, safety Bradley McDougald, and a 2021 third-rounder. Adams had an excellent first year for the Seahawks, recording 9.5 sacks, a single-season record for a defensive back, while helping them them to their first NFC West division crown in 4 years. But Adams' tenure in Seattle has been marred by injuries and rapidly declining production ever since. He missed 5 games in 2021 and all but 1 game in 2022. Though they loaded up on draft picks, the Jets haven't gotten any better since trading Adams. They have Sauce Gardner, CJ Mosley, and Quinnen Williams rounding out a promising nucleus, but the Jets are still lacking that one big-time game changer on defense. Seeing how much of a superstar he was with the Jets and how disappointing he's been in Seattle, it's rather obvious that Adams should have never left Gotham in the first place. DeAndre Hopkins and Houston Texans. In a stunning 2020 offseason blockbuster move, the Texans traded superstar wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins to the Arizona Cardinals, along with a 4th-round pick, for a past-his-prime running back, David Johnson, plus 2022nd and 2021 4th-round picks. Hopkins had an excellent first season with Kyler Murray and company in 2020, hauling in 115 receptions for 1,407 yards and 6 touchdowns. Unfortunately, injuries and a 6-game suspension limited D-Hop to 19 total games over the next 2 years. Nuck even had to miss Arizona's wildcard round blowout loss to the Los Angeles Rams. After failing to find a trade partner, the Cardinals released Hopkins in the 2023 offseason. So Hopkins had 3 valuable prime years wasted on a mediocre Arizona team. The Texans went 11-38-1 in the first 3 years of the post-Hopkins era, and they didn't begin to turn a corner until the arrivals of CJ Stroud and D'Amico Ryans in 2023. Le'Veon Bell and Pittsburgh Steelers. Bell was the NFL's best do-it-all running back from 2014 to 2017. He, Antonio Brown, and Ben Roethlisberger formed the explosive Killer Bees trio that propelled Pittsburgh to 3 AFC North Division crowns, 4 playoff berths, and a trip to the 2016 AFC Championship game. In the 2018 offseason, Bell was offered a lucrative 5-year extension worth $70 million. He stupidly turned it down and decided to sit out the entire year, helping to preserve his long-term health and to land a more lucrative contract. In 2019, Bell signed a 4-year deal with the Jets worth $52.5 million. He averaged a pathetic 3.3 yards per carry in 17 games with the Jets, recording just 3 touchdowns before getting released early in the 2020 season. Bell finished 2020 with the Kansas City Chiefs and split the 2021 season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Baltimore Ravens. He was out of the league altogether after that. He and the Steelers did not benefit whatsoever from this divorce. But what other recent NFL breakups failed for both sides? Let us know in the comment section below. If you liked this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.